Hello and welcome, and thank you to Hari Parekh for being our guest here for this episode of Humanist Prism. Hari, I know you primarily, although I've met you many times before, I know you primarily at the moment as the chair of the regional committee of the European Regional Committee of Young Humanists International, which is probably one of the longest job titles in humanism. But perhaps you can maybe start by telling us a little bit more about yourself, how you got involved in humanism and Humanists International, and anything else relevant.
Yeah, so my name's Hari. I got involved with humanism when I was in my second year undergrad at the University of Northampton. Joined which was the Atheist Humanist and Secular Student Society, which was the student sector of the then British Humanist Association back in 2013. Got involved in that service. Was the regional coordinator for the East Midlands. We set up a society at the University of Leicester. Then from there became New Societies Officer. We set up around 15 societies, including in the Republic of Ireland, which was the first in a long time. Then ran the student sector, which is now called Humanist Students. So that was my kind of transition. Started my society at Northampton, did really well, and then moved into the national sector. And to be fair, I've been working for, let's say, humanism for a number of years now. It's coming on to 6 years, I think. So did my stint within the student sector, and then worked for the apostasy service called Faith to Faithless for a couple of years. And then I think through my work with the student service sector, there was the opening for the European section of Humanists International, in Young Humanists International, which seemed like a good transition from UK student issues. So that's how I kind of got involved. So quite new to it all. But yeah, that's the quick start on how I've gotten involved.
Interesting.
I haven't left yet.
Very good. Very good. And so I guess one thing that'd be interesting is how did you how did you sort of first identify yourself as a humanist, and how did you know that you were one?
So I was religious until second year of university. I was primarily a Hindu, believed it quite a lot, was pretty religious. And I think that really what it came down to was how I really saw the things around me, or how I understood perspectives around me. And actually the argument was that it was less of a religious stance and more of a human rights one. And I think that the more I kind of unpicked that, the more I kind of realized that actually maybe my stance isn't so religious and maybe it's something else. And it's through that level of questioning that I was like, well, actually maybe this isn't the way that I kind of see the world.
Interesting.
And I think that compared to many apostates or many people who leave their religion, I was quite lucky in that my folks were fine. So, you know.
Oh, really?
I know. See, it's
that's interesting.
Exactly. So, I'm quite an anomaly within this.
And are your folks still religious?
Yeah, they're pretty happy doing their own thing. Yeah, it's fine. And that's probably one of the nicest parts of all this, I guess.
And what about like siblings, other family members? Was the reaction quite open-minded then?
Pretty much. I mean, I got really lucky. Family have been fine. There's only me, so that makes it a lot easier, I guess. But to be fair, family have been quite supportive. If anything, nothing changed.
Okay.
So as a result of that, it's quite a humanistic way of looking at the people that you love, I guess, rather than taking them on a value of what they are rather than who they are.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, of course, one of the pieces of work you were involved in, as you said, was Faith to Faithless. And I've seen a number of presentations and sort of read a number of things online of some of the cases where they are providing support to people who have left a religious community or they've chosen to no longer identify themselves with that religious community. And some pretty drastic consequences that come from that. Maybe you could tell, so some of the people that will be watching this will not be familiar with that program. So maybe you could tell us a bit about like what Faith to Faithless is and the kind of work that they do, and maybe some of the examples of things that they've done to help people in that situation.
So It was co-founded by Imtiaz Shams and Alia Salim a good few years ago, and I think they've kind of incorporated themselves within Humans UK. So it's the apostasy service for Humans UK to support people that are going through said transition from religious to non-religious, or even just questioning it. And I think that there are a lot of people that work for that section that have been through some harrowing life's events. So you're looking at things like homelessness, shunning, you're looking at being, abused as a result of it, you're looking at being, kicked out as a result of it. And they've been through quite gnarly and difficult circumstances to get where they are to get today, where they're quite happy with the way that they identify as. So the service is primarily there to kind of support people that are going through those issues and work in those ways. And I think it's more about raising awareness of it, getting people to become more aware that these circumstances do occur. And I think as a result of that, with greater awareness, there's more greater empathy then hopefully to people that are going through such a journey, because technically, or more likely, it's the lack of empathy or the lack of awareness of people knowing that even exists. Like the notion of people leaving a religious faith is still a pretty revolutionary or pretty a new idea to know when it isn't. It's quite an old thing. So yeah.
That's interesting. So the service is obviously for people in the UK, I guess?
Yeah, it's for people in the UK, yeah. But
yeah.
I think from what I recollect that people do find it quite
from other places.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah, of course. That's interesting. And I guess it must be a very nerve-wracking thing to even bring yourself to speak to somebody about, if you're from, one of these families where it's, a very conservative, I guess, type of religion.
Yeah, I think that it's, it shares a lot of commonalities with people who come out as gay or come out as lesbian or LGBTQ plus. It comes, it has a lot of parallels with the notion of the difference in ideology or the difference in identity, and identifying as such is a very tricky thing for people to do. And understandably, when you have a society or a community where those things are quite not stagnant but stuck in just the way things are, it's just the culture, it's just the way it's the way that the family is or the orientation is or whatnot, then it becomes even more difficult, let's say, to then create those sense of changes in that, my offspring has decided against that. Well, actually, it becomes more complicated, because the moment a child or an offspring or a family member decides against it, then actually they're going against the principles that family and that community hold dear. They're going against the value system. They're going against the kind of social fabric that ties people together in that way. And turning your back on one part of it then creates the concern that you're then turning your back on the whole of that part, which then makes it even more complicated for perhaps people to feel like they can even do that.
Yeah.
You have a lot of people that live very cognitive dissonance kind of lives where they're trying to manage two different personas to kind of keep themselves true to the self that they want to be, and to the self that they feel that they have to show to the others.
That's interesting, yeah. I wonder, I was raised in a Catholic family, and my family background is sort of Irish Catholic. My grandfather came over from Ireland, blah, blah, blah. And when I sort of stopped being religious, a bit like nobody really cared. I think my mum was vaguely disappointed, but she didn't care, really. But the interesting thing is that I think to an increasingly less extent, but still somewhat, the idea of Catholicism and Irishness and that identity for our family still has some importance. I can't think of anything tangible, but do you feel the same way about your family? Like, does Hinduism and your family's does it have a wider importance in identity in a more tangible way, perhaps? Or what do you think about that?
I think that's the beautiful thing about holding an ideology in context, right? In that, if it doesn't do that, then is it really doing what it aims to do? If it doesn't take hold in somebody's life in that way, does it really do what it says on the tin? The answer is probably no. I think that really what I find interesting as somebody who's come out of it is that, you know, in relevance to kind of like the stages of grief model, you know, you go through the thought of changing the way that you are. You know, if you come out of a relationship, you come out of, you know, you go through those kind of hurdles of trying to come out of it and give it 5-6 months, and you can kind of find your feet again. But what you'll find, or a lot of times, is that, so especially with a relationship, sometimes things will remind you of X, or sometimes things will remind you of Y, or whatever. And this journey is no different. The difference is, however, is that as somebody who's made that decision, has gone through that transition, you can pick and choose what you wish to bring over with you. So, for example, the Indian classical arts are so entrenched within Hinduism, are so entrenched within within the Vedas and all those kind of systems. But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to enjoy the art form or enjoy it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's part of what I enjoy and what I like and who I am. I can't then not enjoy that just because it has a little bit of religiosity in it.
That's interesting.
So I think that that's sticking true to who I am, how I am, and actually how I'm then going to develop me as a me, rather than, you know, a shady copy of Hitchens or a shady copy of Dawkins. Or, do you know what I mean? That doesn't work. That's not true. It's not meaningful either.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that people who go through this transition might find really difficult in going, I don't want anything to do with it. It means nothing. Da 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 da. There's also some people out there that go, well, actually not. Those few things actually do. Let me just bring them with me. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
So yeah, whether you bring parts of the Irish Catholicism with you, if you like parts of the incense, then by all means, stick an incense in.
It's funny you say that, you know, because I don't have any incense on the go at the moment, but one of my very close friends got married, must be about 4 years ago now, and he had a Catholic ceremony, and I went along, and you know, I felt completely fine with going and attending, but actually something I wasn't prepared for was my feelings in the actual moment. You know, just we used to call it the bells and smells. You know, like the Catholic sort of paraphernalia. Yeah, it's you can see why for many people, even in a purely physical thing, it's a very captivating piece of theatre. And I don't mean that in a dismissive thing.
You're not wrong. I mean, Hinduism has the same thing. You walk in and the senses, it's overloaded. There's enough there to capture that kind of you could say that kind of like transcendence theatre. And it works. It's brilliant. I took my folks to the Monday like a few months ago, and before COVID, let's say. And you know, those feelings do just come back. You get it, but then you're more aware of actually, where am I? What am I doing? But it doesn't stop you from going, does it?
No. It's interesting.
The food's great, so why would you stop?
The one reflection I had was that I found quite interesting was I found like I said, the bells and smells, the singing, just the nice ornate church and stuff. I found that all beautiful. The one thing that I really struggled with is in Catholicism, there's this thing called the Nicene Creed, and it's literally a creed. So it's this massive, long sort of prayer, which you learn to recite, and you learn it. I went to Catholic school, so you learn it very young, and it basically includes all the dogmas of the Catholic Church. You know, so the Trinity, the da 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 da, and it's because for 10 years or whatever, hadn't said it or I hadn't heard it recited. I'd kind of forgotten about it because I could do it by rote. You know, I didn't actually understand the words. It was more a kind of rhythmic, memorized thing. But to listen to it in a more conscious way, I mean, it sounded completely mad. You know, it sounded, I think because I hadn't been used to saying it, it just sounded like really weird and creepy. And that was interesting.
See, the interesting thing is that because I never stopped listening to classical music, all of that stuff I've never stopped listening to it. So actually it all just it's all very normal, weirdly.
Right.
It's, it's very devotional, it's very intense, and it's very much, it's got that kind of essence of spirituality kind of bringing it through. Not that I attach anything of that to it, but you can see the notion of where they're coming from, and you can appreciate all that. Do I get a little bit weirded out sometimes and go, well, actually, you know what? Maybe, but actually then with an art form, it's more complicated than that, because then you're ripping out an art form for what it is. Whereas just plain old Sanskrit is, I mean, very weirdly, I mean, it's very old school, let's just say.
Ancient school, you might say.
Precisely. And, you know, the ability to make it seem more relevant to today's time is a very difficult skill, which some people do attempt to try. Not that it works, perhaps.
That's interesting.
Again, very weird.
I wonder, maybe just, I hadn't planned to ask you about this, but so this is going to be the third episode of this new video series, and the first episode we had was with a guy called V.B. Rawat, who's an India. He's a Delhi-based humanist campaigner, and he campaigns, among many other things, on the caste system. And we had a big long discussion about the caste system, which is a very, very complicated issue, which is difficult to unpack. But one of the things that he was talking about was, from his view, the intrinsic connection between the caste system and Hinduism, and he actually suggested that another name for Hinduism might be Brahmanism, referring to the kind of high caste people that he would see as being in control of kind of Hindu culture and stuff, or the religion. I wonder if, I mean, this is maybe, I realize that this is a massive question, but I just wondered if you had any sort of thoughts on that might be interesting to share with people.
It's a great way of thinking about it in relation to, because a lot of the issues with Hinduism is that people go, it's not a religion, it's a culture. It's not a piece of culture. It's just the way of life. It's not a way of life. It's this. It's actually, what is it? Oh, it's just the name that, you know, the British gave to the people on the Indus River. You know, again, I think actually again, as an organized religion, which it is, the Brahmins were the ones in control of the house it and the knows it and what the actual things were, supposedly.
What's that? Sorry, I don't
They were in control of the knowledge of the systems, right? So they were the ones that could read the Sanskrit. They were the ones in control of all that.
Oh, I see.
And they were at the top of the ladder. So it makes sense that the colleague earlier would have represented Hinduism in that way. And it's a very much trickle-down theory where it starts at the top and it follows down, right? So whether you're worthy is based on how far up you are on that totem pole by nature of chance of birth, or by their state of mind. It's more of a methodical kind of mathematics of that's where you would have ended up, supposedly. Is it a better way of understanding it? Probably. Is it a better way of understanding power and control? Very, because technically that's the way it is. That's the way the Vedas have been written, for example. Does it help? Probably not, because technically, like, Hinduism's evolved itself into, you know, branching out from just being this kind of religious text to incorporating itself into as a culture, into as a tradition, into, you know, several facets of life where, you know, Christianity, Islam might not, to some regards. And actually that makes Hinduism sometimes less concerning to the most. However, you only have to look at the levels of Hindutva at the moment, or the ways that some activists have been targeted by Hindutva, and then the things that I've been saying previously, where I'm going, it might not be sexy now, but actually these things are coming up. We're now seeing those things kind of come into its prime, especially with the way that the politics in that state is going as well. So add all of those things put together, if anything, it just makes a very ugly set of circumstances and situations. It moves past this issue of Brahmanism versus everything else. It moves into this, you know, ideological state, which is looking to politicize itself. That's kind of where Hinduism, in that sense, is going more than your. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are people that still to this day struggle with the caste system. And there's people to this day that still struggle with the notion of the sense of what you are is of importance, rather than who you are. When, you know, and there are people going through those kind of tricky difficulties for a number of years, and sadly will continue to do so. Will that ever change with changing it to Brahmanism? No. Changing the term to it? No. It's just about changing people's comprehension of the fact that it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, well, that was just an interesting aside, and
Anyway, yeah.
it made me think of one thing which might be an interesting segue into your research, which is quite often when the question, the issue you were saying there about the way people view the impact of Hinduism and is it a culture, is it a religion, blah blah blah. I often think that the same can be true, I guess, of any religion or any even ideology. I often think when we argue, if you argue with somebody about their religious views on any certain topic, as I have sometimes, when I went through my deconversion from Catholicism, I've had a few.
We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't look back
And
fondly on it, but we've all been there.
yeah, exactly. And but the one thing that I quickly realized was there isn't one Catholic view, one Catholic ideology. There's 1.5 billion or however many, there's 1.5 billion versions of the Catholic religion, because inside everybody's head, the mental gymnastics and you used that term before. What did you say? Cognitive dissonance. All these different aspects. It makes the different people's perceptions of it, and therefore their lived reality of that religion, very different. But anyway, that was an interesting way of me to try and segue into the research which you published at the beginning of the year. Was it before the lockdown? It seems like a million years ago.
January, yeah.
January, wow.
Wow, can we remember that time?
Like a different epoch. So can you tell us, what was that research about and how did you do it? What was your results?
So, to be fair, the research itself looks at apostasy, so people who leave their religious faith, and it looks at whether or not people that leave their religious faith, are they at risk of being victims of abuse as a result of leaving within religious households. That's technically where we started with the research, and to be fair, we answered that question, which was yes. We found 228 people over the space of 30 different countries.
Wow, I didn't know.
Yeah. So the worldwide sample, we've got, from the UK to Saudi Arabia to Pakistan to places in America, places in other places in Asia, and perhaps a few in the continent of Africa. So yeah, worldwide sample looking at that. And what we found was that to begin with, we had a sample of Christians, Muslims, people identifying as Hindu, and other religions as well. The problem was that we only had significant samples in our Christian and Muslim kind of and non-religious kind of cohort. So what we found, really, we kind of showed in evidence the trend that non-religiosity is growing. So, at birth, we had supposedly 130 Christians and 68 Muslims. And then currently, when the research was done, we only had 12 people identifying as Christian and 4 people identifying as Muslim. So what we then found was a 91 to 94% decrease in people identifying as religious. And we saw a 1,033% increase in people identifying as non-religious. So from 18 to 204.
Wow.
So that was the first interesting thing, because technically, a lot of the times when we, when you're going through those grief cycles, for example, you'll argue with enough people about how difficult this journey is, how many people go through it. And for example, on the big questions, Abdullah Al-Andalusi once asked Kate Smurthwaite, where's your evidence? Show me your evidence. And it's like, here it is. We actually have it in print. So that's showing you where the trend is at the moment. And then what we then did is we were looking at risk of abuse, right? So we used a conflict tactic scale by Strauss and colleagues, and basically which looks at things like assault, serious assault, and psychological abuse. So interestingly, even with the lower proportion of people identifying as Muslim, we actually found that there was more statistical significance with identifying as Muslim and being at risk of serious abuse, serious assault, and psychological abuse as a result of leaving their faith. Christian apostates as well, to be fair, not so far off. So that was the primarily kind of most significant part of the research, is that we found that. Secondly, negotiation was insignificant. So the thought that, so negotiation is when, you know, two people try and figure things out and they work through it, right? What we found was that that wasn't really happening. So either it's a, you know, we don't understand it, you know, here's a few assaults and serious assaults and psychological abuse, or it's a view of families just really being unable to comprehend why their child or why their family member would go through such a transition. If, for example, within that ideology, they know what might happen as a result, right? So hellfire, this or that. And then I think the biggest thing when it comes to victims is what did they do with their victimization? I mean, to be fair, hardly anybody goes to the police with this. So out of 154 people who were assaulted, only 9 people reported it, which is only like 5.8%.
Wow.
And then out of the 71 people who said they didn't report their abuse, the reason why was because 44% believed that reporting it would be disrespectful to the family and a betrayal to the family. 27% said that they thought the police wouldn't be able to help them. And then 10% were worried about further repercussions. So when victims have no faith in their own local law enforcement worldwide, that they'll actually be able to help them, I mean, what can victims even do? They're basically just going to be hidden. So that's a snapshot of the evidence that we're able to actually find, and we were the first ones to show it.
Wow, that's interesting. And this was this part of your undergrad?
My master's.
Your master's, sorry, right? So you just finished your master's now, and then you're in the beginning of your PhD, is that right?
Yeah, I've just
or your clinical psychology doctorate.
Yeah, just started my
Clin Psych, is it?
It is.
Yeah. So I was
Liverpool.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I was mentioning just before we started that I studied psychology undergrad, and it was for a long time my ambition to become a clinical psychologist. I did a very short internship at a private psychology practice in Glasgow, and decided it wasn't for me. I wasn't very good at it. So yeah, but it's a very intense and very. So how long have you been trying to get on? Because it's a very intense program to actually get into.
I got quite lucky. I've only tried two times, so that's 2 years.
Very good. That's impressive. And do you think so thinking ahead to your future career as a clinical psychologist, do you think this is something which will be perhaps of increasing importance, or something that people will have to consider in terms of psychology practice?
Definitely. I did a similar kind of interview with another clinical psychologist, Mary Ann Trent, recently, who saw my research and was just like, oh, I'm interested. How does that relate? And actually, it relates quite a lot because, you know, back in when domestic violence was becoming a topic of discussion, nobody knew it existed in its form, right? This is basically, and then from that, we've got things like honor-based violence. From that, we've got things like forced marriage and female genital mutilation and honor-based violence as well. And actually, what I'm trying to argue is here's another addition to that ring of issues that are very culturally significant. They're not localized to the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic group. It doesn't matter really, because we've got Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons as well that are going through things like this, and Christians, etc. So it surpasses those kind of cultural boundaries that perhaps female genital mutilation might. And because of the layer of religion and culture and tradition that's kind of enveloped over it, it means that it's more likely to not be sought out as much as the others. So I think that it's very important for clinicians that are currently registered and qualified, and those that are up and coming, to be aware that there are people that are actually being abused for just leaving their religious faith. And if anything, within therapy, if that gives you an insight into the difficulties that they've had, or where they're at, or how, or what things that they might have been through or gone through, or the changes in identity from one to another, and the difficulties of bringing those through. I mean, all of those things are significant to the picture or the jigsaw that is the human person, right? So I think, one, it's very significant. Secondly, in the future, as a clinician, definitely people need to be aware of it. And thirdly, if people are being abused by it, then that increases the need for law enforcement, governments, legislation to then become aware of it, to then basically do something about it. The CPS for example, won't know this exists. So even if the police find an issue like this, how are they supposed to prove it when the CPS won't even know that it's an existing thing? So I think that there's a lot of layers to. It's not just about putting a piece of research out. It's about, well, actually, this has significance in supporting a lot of people that might not have had support so far. So, for example, I'm working with a colleague at the moment at the Open University looking at apostasy and homelessness, because there's a link in relation to shunning within Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and things like that. When they find out that they're no longer religious, well, actually, what's the effect of that? What's going on? Again, it's an area that occurs. These are issues that are happening now. It's just that we don't have the words to associate to state that's because of this, and that's all I'm trying to do.
That's really interesting. I can imagine thinking about psychology and clinical practice that people will access. Religion, for people who are religious or who have left a religious community or something, it must be a very important factor in somebody's care, because if you think about religious philosophies and so on, they are very intrinsic to idea of self-worth and the meaning that you ascribe to yourself and people around about you and so on. So I wonder, do you think, do clinicians, psychologists get a lot of training on how to handle issues of religion and so on? Is that something which is particularly explored?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's one of those things that you might learn on the job or learn as you go. I think that it's, at the end of the day, if somebody is religious, there's no point in, getting them down and going, does this exist, does this not, and giving them an existential crisis. It's, whatever I'm not there to change their belief. I'm there to support them through whatever transition they're going through or whatever difficulty in their period of life. Religion might be a good thing for them in that moment.
Yeah, well, that's what I could sort of imagine that. For people who are, if you're helping somebody, then I can imagine that religion could be an enormous source of comfort to people.
Precisely. I've had clients and patients in the past who, feel very strongly about their religious faith, and so they should, because actually it's the one element of their life that's providing them with the sense of soothing or safety net. I remember going through 10.5 years or more racism and hate crime back home in Nottingham, and to be fair, the religious faith was a support blanket, it was a safety net, and it was something that worked really well. So it's not to knock it, it's just to understand the function of it for that person, and how it works with them. So yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And do you think, you obviously mentioned about your research, and it obviously seems like a brand new, or at least a very novel area of research. Do you know if there will be any more, or if, what type of research might come out of it?
So, as every piece of science goes, you want somebody to kind of give it another go and replicate it, right? So by all means, for somebody else to come along and go, well, I tried to see what they found and this is what I did. That's all part of the journey of being able to put piece of research out there. So yeah, I hope people go out there and give it a go and test it out and see if they come up with something similar. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I'll continue exploring it and kind of putting things out there in the academic sphere, so that at least if we can create a sense of if we create a database full of academic research on this issue, then great. But as long as we can do something that helps people where they're not receiving help at the moment, then I've done my job as an academic and a clinician, really.
Great. Maybe to focus a bit more on your involvement with young humanists and humanist students and Young Humanists International, there'll be many people hopefully many people who watch this video, but that won't have a youth section of their national organisation in different parts of the world. Can you maybe just give us a bit, a bit of your experience in getting involved in a youth section? How does it work, and what advice would you give to people who wanted to start one or join one, for example?
It's very vital, because at the end of the day, it's those young people that are questioning. It's the young people that are thinking about things. At the end of the day, if we put it in the light, blasphemy laws affect religious people, and blasphemy laws are likely to also affect young religious people that are questioning where things are at and how things are. And I think it's part of our kind of responsibility to go, there is a place here for young people to kind of come ask questions, not be usurped, not be, under the influence of, humanism trying to take over the world, but actually just being provided a perspective that might be different to what they might have heard. And actually that's the point of growth. Humanism or non-religiousness, or having a difference of perspective that is different from religion, isn't to convert somebody to that perspective. At the end of the day, as you well know, it's something that you have to come at if you want to come at it, and if you're questioning it and you're searching for that and you're looking for that. It's not up to any of us to go out there with the God delusion and whatever Hitchens wrote and go, this is what you need to follow. It doesn't work like that. It's a personal journey. So I think that's the first point, in that it's not conversion, it's just a supported journey. Some people go through that journey and realize it's not for them. That's fair, and that doesn't matter, but they'll take something from that. The greatest religious people are out there that are the ones that take those humanistic principles and apply it back to their religious faith. At the end of the day, what more could one ask for? Going aside from that, the starting up a young person's part within this activism part is brilliant. Universities are where it's really at, and that's where you kind of get your sense of the notion of wanting to think differently, the notion of wanting to be challenged, the notion to wanting to have your views kind of not ripped apart, but ripped apart, and trying to like really figure out exactly where do you align with all this. And I think if it wasn't for my housemate Tim in second year, I really wouldn't have challenged myself in the way that I did, to kind of go, well, actually, what do I actually think, not what was I just taught. So having those systems on a national level and a local level are imperative to make sure that we're not missing a young person that might need support. I started my society at Northampton, at the University of Northampton, not so that I could be a president of a society, but so that I could support those young people at the university that had gone through a similar transition to me and needed a support system when they wouldn't have had one. That's the point. So sometimes the adult sectors don't always incumbent that. So,
that's interesting. Yeah, that sounds obviously very sensible. I wonder as well, I was just thinking as you said that there, that perhaps one of the other functions of these groups might be to demonstrate that there is a bunch of people out there in the world, humanists and so on, who have this, ethical, non-religious worldview, and that they're not mad, that they're normal, nice, sensible people. So perhaps it has that dual function as well.
I think the greatest things I've learned as a non-religious brown guy specifically is that I remember when we started our society, and we were next to the Islamic Society at the time in the library or something, and they came over and they were just like, what are you doing to me? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, who runs the society? I was like, well, I do. And it's like, how can you turn your back on history? How can you be such a traitor to your own kind of, I don't know, skin color, or just like ethnicity, and turn around like that? I had, in Freshers' Fair, I had Black Christian students kind of pick up. I mean, I purchased all the merchandise for it because our society was poor at the time. Pick up all our merchandise and throw it across the room, going, how can they even allow this to be at the university? Wow. So I think that what these endeavors do is it allows a conversation to take place where we reduce the level of threat that religious students, for example, in this context, but religious people in general, feel of somebody who's non-religious. Because at the end of the day, they would have heard the story, they would have been taught, what the non-religious people are like. We're all going out 24/7 and in a feature of anarchism and hedonism, right? That's basically all we do every single day. For example, not quite, yeah.
Well, I've taken the hour off, obviously, to speak to you.
I'm pushing the boat out a little bit there, but I think this is my point in that.
I know what you mean, though, yeah.
What these conversations do is it reduces their level of threat in going, well, actually, you know what? He's not as what I thought he would have been like being non-religious, or he's not as, what I thought of, or he's not like Dawkins, and he's not like Hitchens, he's not as rude as Hitchens. And I think that it's those conversations that allow people to feel that, you know what, that's not an issue. And I think that it's breaking down those stereotypes at the moment that is one of the biggest difficulties at the moment in kind of going, well, it's, being non-religious isn't a bad thing. They've just changed the way, they're just thinking a bit differently. They're still the same human being and individual. You don't need to abuse them as a result of changing their thoughts, because that's just thought crime. So,
Yeah.
that's a big step. That's a huge step.
Yeah.
Especially with the way that scriptures talk about non-religious people. But I think just because it's written down doesn't make it fact.
Yeah. That's interesting. And you just mentioning there about the the racism that you faced. I mean, that is and I guess it feeds into what you were saying before about the fear that some apostates might feel about leaving their religion, because that's an example of something that they maybe fear would happen to them. And that's interesting. I wonder as well, I mean, do you have any thoughts about, like, what do you think humanism and non-religious ethical views and stuff, is that something which is seen by many people as like a white person thing? And is there an element like that? I don't know.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's a very it's a very westernized kind of view of society, isn't it? And I think that I think that then comes from stereotypes that can then comes from things like colonialism, that then comes from things like usurpation, all that kind of usurping stuff and all that jazz. I think really being non-religious doesn't really change who you are. It just changes the way that you associate X and Y. You're just basically, rather than taking a stance on the podium for, it's like going for, it's a little bit like you and me both wear glasses, right? I wear contact lenses at the moment, you're wearing glasses. There's no difference. We're still seeing, we're still understanding what, it's just the difference of the way that we perceive the world around ourselves. I could wear sunglasses and then my tint will be a bit darker. Big whoop. Doesn't really make that much of a difference to the person that somebody is. And I think that these kind of the thoughts and concepts out there as to, is humanism or non-religious a white thing that's come out, or a white thing that's being pushed over to BAME people, and is it this kind of whitewashing thing? Well, actually, maybe back in the day, and maybe like years and years and years ago, but actually you only have to look at the philosophers within the East, or the philosophers, or the people in Africa, in countries in Africa, and go, well, actually that's pretty much rooted within non-religion. That's pretty much a non kind of religious viewpoint, even if they're religious themselves, and too much emphasis has gone on, is that a religious viewpoint? Is that not? You only have to look at the people. You have to look at things like, you have to look at people that have made an impact in society. And actually thinking about Nehru and things, and binding something like India together and going, well, actually we'll keep it secular, for a reason.
Yeah.
It works in principle.
That's interesting, and I've got a number of colleagues at Humanists International as well. Like, I can think of somebody like Kato from Uganda, or Roslyn from Ghana, who, they would say to me things like, well, to see, the connection between race and religion is perhaps even the opposite way. They would see Christianity as something which was imposed by, I think, probably the British, but European rulers, so like you could actually, and some people have been trying to sort of show that it can have this opposite direction from the one that some people nowadays would consider.
I think there was the argument. I think, if I'm right, I mean, I'm sure people will tell me if I'm wrong, which is fine. But
sure, on the internet you can be guaranteed.
Yeah, it will happen, which is fine. It's why we're alive. I swear there was an argument recently which basically said in the Bible, if there's a part on that which tells you how to manage slaves, it tells you what kind of way it's kind of come from. It doesn't really, this is where I think I also heard the argument that that's where Islam worked its way, because it basically didn't add those parts in, or wasn't basically telling you how to manage people in that way, which might have helped people in those days. But again, I think that it's perspective. It's also political. I mean, the amount of politics that goes on with Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or whatever being accepted was a part of, it's basically a piece of political philosophy, how they're able to do it. How do you get people to, agree that this is the way to live, or this is an ideal thing to ascribe to, or this is the way for things to go on? That is politics. There's no other word for it. It's just how successful have those people been in being able to show people that actually this is more true than the other one. And whether people sign up or whether they don't, big whoop.
Interesting. And I guess going back to what you were saying about your research earlier about the massive transition of the people you interviewed from religion at birth to non-religiousness nowadays, and you and I will know that in the UK, the social attitudes will show that the majority of Britons are non-religious. A bigger proportion of people live according to vaguely humanistic values. So when they make a big life decision, they won't consult the Bible or the holy scriptures. They'll ask their friends or their family and blah blah blah. So there's this picture for people outside of the UK that the UK is a very secular society, and not a secular law, of course, but the society is very secular in the sense that most people day to day, religion is not an important thing in their lives. Very different, I think, from perhaps the perspective we have in the United States and many other places, but and also becoming increasingly so. The next generations, younger ones, are going to be less and less religious. So perhaps the humanists of the future in the UK will be less like you and I, in the sense that they have come from a religious background into a humanistic one, and they will be coming from, I don't know, an amoral background into perhaps a humanistic one. I wonder, do you think, what does the future of a non-religious society look like? Is it necessarily a humanistic one, or is it something else? I don't know.
I mean, I think the trend is of people becoming more non-religious. I don't think religion's going anywhere. That's the point. And I think that the thought that, in the future is that, in the future there'll be less yous and I's, and there'll be more people that have kind of come out of just non-religion. Personally, I don't see it. I kind of take that Hitchens view of, would you like the Four Horsemen bit where he's just like, what would happen if God didn't exist tomorrow? Would you want that? And like, yeah. And Hitchens is saying no. I think part of me doesn't ever see that disappearing in that way, because actually it's a big part of human experience, faith and belief and religion. And actually the interesting thing is that we see a lot of the difficulties of faith, religion, belief, and how that can affect someone, and how difficult that those issues can be. I think that when we're then thinking about this issue, when we're then talking with ourselves, I think we might then be somewhat guilty sometimes of creating like a bottleneck of going, well, actually, how do you think things are going to be in the future? Maybe it's just going to be more like this. In actual fact, I don't see it. I actually see just if anything, I hope that future generations are just more accepting of change. So I don't think it's going to be it's not an amoral, being humanistic or non-religious isn't an amoral standpoint. It's still a moral, ethical viewpoint. It's my argument is that actually the way that society, the transition or the kind of the journey where people are going at the moment, I just hope that it's more of an accepting nature of going, people move from one to one to one to one. That's fine. We'll accept it. We'll let them carry on. It's not a big issue. It's not worth killing somebody over. It's not worth beating somebody up over. It's not worth psychologically torturing them as a result of them doing that. And I think that as long as we're in a society where those things occur, I don't think anybody could ask for anything more. The moment one ism becomes bigger than another ism is when the one ism then it then just creates another sense of issues that we don't really want to repeat, I think. And there's an argument out there of non-religion then becoming the next thing, Hitchens and you don't want that. Do you know what I mean? So
no idol worshipping.
or making people in your graven image. You don't, we don't want statues of these guys kind of being made and created. But yeah, I think that's my argument, in that with the research, the aim is for society is to become more understanding, more empathic, more, more aware, and more able to respect the view that people can change a religious faith. People can dip in and out. People can, the Pope was incorrect in saying people can pick a mix. People can pick a mix from what they were from and what they are as much as they want, because they can.
Yeah, and people do, of course.
They do it all the time. And as you said earlier, people hold a narrative of their perspectives of the world, of their understandings of society, of this, people hold a narrative on science and climate change and all this kind of jazz. Of course, people are going to have narratives on their own religious faith, and that's going to differ between everybody. We're all pick and mixing anyway, because that's human. If we didn't do that, we'd be the Borg.
Yeah, very interesting.
I don't really want to assimilate. That's it.
Very good.
I'll be ready for 2 seconds and then I'll get out of it.
One last thing, I was just wondering, just as you were talking there, and I was thinking about, as somebody who's thinking about psychological well-being and, how to improve your well-being and so on, we're obviously just coming through, well, in the UK at the moment, we're recording this at the end of September. It's kind of unclear what the status is, but it looks like we have emerged from one lockdown and we perhaps are heading into another, perhaps longer 6-month lockdown. There's a who knows, but there's a lot going on, and of course, one of the serious things is that of course, a lot of people have sadly died, and a lot of horrible things have happened. People's jobs are insecure, but everybody in this country has been faced with a massive change in circumstances, a lot more isolation and so on. Like, I just wondered, like, as somebody who's thinking about psychological well-being and stuff, do you have any sort of reflections on that, or any tips or any sort of things that you could say, like, let's make this a public service announcement, how can people be more aware of their psychological well-being as we're all sort of locked down at home potentially for 6 months?
I think, I mean, look, I'm only a trainee, so I've only just started, so take it with a pinch of salt, but it's not easy for everyone. We're all in the same, for once, we're all in the same boat. We're all trying, we're all trying to work or do things or live with family, and we're all enclosed with each other for so long. I mean, it's going to be difficult for everybody. The general thing of, figuring out what works for you and figure that out and kind of do it in a way that makes you feel better about yourself, whether that is for, going for a walk, for a run, doing something different, reading a book, whatever's meaningful, you give that a go. I think, interestingly, when we look at things like, the numbers of things like domestic violence crime go up, we look at the numbers of kind of all those things that we know that kind of increase as a result of people being locked in at home. My thoughts actually go to the people that are going through these transitions and getting abused by it, because there's no recognition of the fact that this thing is a thing. So I think that really it's about just keeping oneself safe, and that might be doing things in a way where you're having to prioritize keeping yourself safe before thinking about other parts of yourselves. I think that's the biggest part. And the other thing is that one of the interesting things about lockdown, or even the state of society at the moment, is that genuinely there's this humanistic need to kind of help people out there. So I think that as long as we're trying to do that, then we're all going to try our best to do it, really. Here's the hope, hey?
A positive vision, I hope.
A beacon of positivity. Right?
Yeah. I'll take it.
I'm the most pessimistic guy you could be.
Well, listen, Harry, that's been a very interesting kind of overview of some of the things that you're working on, and some interesting.
Did you want to talk about the European Young Humanist?
Yes, let's talk about that. I've actually I'm going to share this screen. Where is it? Okay. So we'll talk about the. Okay, I don't know which button I'm pressing here. Okay, here we go. So I'm sharing the screen now. So we're talking about the European Young Humanist International event. So can you see them here?
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe you want to just tell us a little bit about these events and how people
Yeah,
can get
so
involved. Is it open to people regardless of whether they're in Europe or not?
it's just in Europe.
Okay. So
It is.
nobody from outside Europe can join it, for example, to
I mean, they
watch?
can. They
Yeah.
can watch it. They can. But we are trying to advertise for Europeans, just because, I mean, in the state of backstory is that within Young Humanists International, the European sector of Young Humanists International has been pretty dormant for a good 5 to 6 years or whatever it is. And part of the reason for that was that predecessors have always asked what the purpose of Europe actually is when it comes to this level of activism. The problem is that because we're not being killed for apostasy, let's say, it makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of go, well, what's the point? In comparison to some of my other kind of colleagues. So with my research being released in January, that kind of gave me the focal point to basically look at blasphemy laws. So within Europe, we still have blasphemy laws in some nation states. And even if we don't have blasphemy laws per se, we still have the culture against religious issues, and we still have the culture against kind of religious values. Exactly, there we go. And to be fair, that was one part of what that research aims to do, is kind of shine a light on the issues of blasphemy laws and the fact that the religious are more likely to be victims of that before the non-religious are. So what do we then do in Europe to, tackle this issue, which is quite a big issue? And part of that thought is, how do we unite young people across Europe specifically when we haven't been able to do it? Now, getting everybody over to the UK is an expensive endeavor, and it costs a lot, and it's just a technical, it's an organizational nightmare trying to organize it. But with lockdown and with people not being able to go anywhere at the moment and things like that, actually, you know what? Holding an online conference or holding an online series of panel talks with speakers that are young as well seems to be a brilliant way of kind of gauging and getting people to, view a different point of view or see what's out there. So that's where this came from, and going, how do we get people together without costing a packet? And that's kind of what we did. So I worked with young humanists in the UK, and we basically created, as you saw earlier, this kind of European Young Humanist Month, which is an online conference. So we're looking at things like queerness in Europe, which is like LGBTQ plus issues. We're looking at, there's one on race and the issues of race within Europe. There's another on apostasy, and there's another on a campaign that we're looking to run in the new year, which is looking at ending blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland, because we still have that, surprisingly.
Very good.
So basically, my endeavor is basically saying that let's get people becoming aware of these conversations. So let's have these conversations. The last two of the ones on apostasy and blasphemy kind of go hand in hand, where we're basically looking at the issues of apostasy out there, and then we're going into the blasphemy campaign to make people aware that, one, can you believe that Northern Ireland has a blasphemy law? And two,
and Scotland.
And they're looking to turn that around a little bit.
It's slightly complicated.
It's just like in a different veil, right? It's just in a different.
It's so the Humanist Society of Scotland have been doing a lot of excellent campaigning on that. Chief Executive is called Fraser. Fraser. He's had meetings with the government, and I think pretty much single-handedly convinced them to not only to repeal the blasphemy law, but also, because the law they're looking to replace the blasphemy law with
hate
crime law, which, of course, hate crime should be illegal, but where you draw the balance is always a genuinely difficult line. And so Fraser's been quite involved with the Justice Minister to try and get that addressed. But yes, it's hopefully, all going well, the blasphemy law will be gone soon. But it's a ridiculous state of affairs that it's 2020 and they're still there, as in Northern Ireland.
This is the interesting thing in that I think Giovanni told me about something that Andrew Copson said, which was the hypocrisy of nations in Europe holding on to these laws, when in fact people in Europe are the ones that are questioning sort of, your Middle Eastern states, etc.
Yep.
Going, why have you got them? You're killing people for them. Da, da, da. And the issue is, well, you guys still have them. Don't come and, it's the classic example of don't come and talk to us about what we have when you've still got them yourselves.
And I think that is used at the international forums. People from like the OIC, which is the organization, I think, of Islamic countries or Islamic cooperation now, they will say things like that at the United Nations. You know, who are you, Ireland, to tell us about our blasphemy law when you still have one? They don't now, actually, because they repealed it last year, but they did recently. Yeah. But you know, but yeah, you're exactly right. That's why for European countries, it's not important to do it just because it's the right thing, but also because it will have a real world impact on what's happening around the world.
Precisely, and I think that, you know, the real issue with one of the issues with blasphemy laws, you only have to look at the ACBB case, you only have to look at the current one in Nigeria. The problem with blasphemy, I mean, they targeted, you know, the one in Nigeria is targeting an actual non-religious person currently.
Yeah, Mubarak Bala is the president of the Humanist Association.
Precisely, but you only have to look at the other ones where they're actually targeting religious people. You know, the ACBB case was completely religious. There was no non-religiousness about it. You know, and that's the point. These blasphemy laws, yeah, they'll affect the non-religious person when they might post a post, or they might do this, or they might do that. But actually, they're the only laws that actually affect religious people questioning the principles and scriptures or whatever that they're taught around them, and then put them, you know, and that increases their likelihood to put them in a state of bother. So really, it's we're arguing to repeal the law so that religious people are freer to question their sense of faith and their sense of ideology and their sense of in the world, really, in my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an area, I think, of what do you call it? It's an example of a concrete campaign that humanists and religious people can do together, because, like you just said, you know, any country in the world you go to which has a blasphemy law, you can be sure that religious people are being persecuted by that law, which is, you know, blasphemy is a nonsense idea anyway. It shouldn't be illegal. But the other thing is that it's interesting that the religious groups that support blasphemy laws are always the majority groups, you know, because they have that dominance, you know, where it's protecting the interests of the current.
As you know, you only have to look at the state of affairs in Pakistan at the moment to question how that is being utilized. You have to look at the state of affairs in Saudi Arabia, and you have to look at the way that, you know, the way that journalists are affected in Saudi Arabia to go, well, actually, you know what? It's an easy way to stop them from questioning it. Again, it's a very outdated sense of legislation that has no effect. The effect of it just affects people when it shouldn't need to. Questioning is a human thing. If we can't question, I mean, it sounds like a very, you know, simple thing, but the idea of asking a question should be normal. It shouldn't be,
and of course,
hanging over your head for it.
Maybe it should be stated as well for likely to be humanist people around the world watching this video. One of the most targeted group for blasphemy laws in somewhere like Pakistan will be other Muslims. You know, this isn't just an issue of non-religiousness. You know, it's being the wrong type of Muslim or whatever. You know, and
but that's the problem, isn't it? Being the wrong type of X is the one that usually affects people more, right? You know, I could be the non-type. I could be the wrong type of non-religious person, but I'm not going to get killed for it.
No.
You know what I mean, or affected, you know, or, you know, ashamed by it, or you know, have been given a sense of shame or guilt as a result of that. It's kind of part and parcel to the way that I work. But yeah, I think it's a big shame that we still have that on top of people still.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Especially when, going further, even within, because the European Union has a specific code within itself which argues against it anyway. So the fact that there are notions within the European Union that still hold on to it is kind of questionable too. So I think really it's more of a wake-up call. Yeah, nobody's going to be, it's like what Giovanni says, nobody's going to be killed for it in Europe, and it's just a fine every now and again, or a big whoop. But actually, it's more than just a big fine. It's more than just a fine every now and again. It's the principle of the matter.
Yeah,
it's the effect that it has. Yeah.
And I mean, I think there was a prosecution in Greece, a guy called Philippos Lozos, and that was close to prison sentence. I think he was given a suspended sentence in the end, but and of course there was a case in Germany with a comedian. I forget the details, but it's a ridiculous state of affairs. Of course it is.
Good and Brown did something good in England, right?
Sorry?
Good and Brown did something good in England in 2008.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's true. Well, that's been a fascinating talk, Harry. Is there anything else? So, we're going to share this with the membership of Humanist International around the world. Is there any last messages or information you would like to share?
I mean, go and read the research. It's out there.
We
Humanist
can put a link in
International,
the description, as they say.
yeah. Humanist International kindly released a commentary on it, so it's easier to read. Then at least they read that one instead, is what I'd say. Any questions? My email address is at the bottom of the paper anyway. So, yeah, get in touch.
Great.
Thank
you very much, Harry,
Harry.
and good luck with your training ahead of you. And the campaigns. I'm sure people can find out about it online. The Young Humanist International Facebook page or
Definitely.
something.